Welcome to Nightcap with Mr. P, brought to you by Straight Talk with Dr. B and Mr. P. Hope you're doing well tonight. Grab yourself a nightcap, get comfortable, and join me as we discuss tonight's topic. I just found this music. It's Tangerine by Van. I hope you like it as much as I do. So this is going to be a little bit different than Straight Talk with Dr. B and Mr. P. On the same subject, some of the responses and the recap from what we talked about on Straight Talking with Dr. B and Mr. P. So we're going to, you're going to take a little journey with me a little bit differently. Sometimes I may have a guest, sometimes I may not. Sometimes it's going to be Mr. P. So, but the goal is to entertain, enlighten, and educate. So, vibe with me for a little bit. All right. So tonight's topic is, and I'm working through what I want to really call it, but it's the working title for tonight's topic is single motherhood a contributing factor to toxic masculinity? Let me say that again. Is single motherhood a contributing factor to toxic masculinity? So we're going to look at masculinity. We're going to look at toxic. We're going to look at the origins of toxic masculinity and the history behind it all the way up until today, and find out not what I just say or what I think, but what experts on the subject think, what some of the research says, and some of what the data and the statistics says about the contributing factors to toxic masculinity, which is used quite often in a lot of the conversations that people are having about relationships, and particularly relationships between men and women and relationships as a whole. Everyone is saying they just got out of the toxic relationship. Like the relationship may cause the toxicity. No, it's the individuals in the relationship that created the toxic environment or brought the toxic traits to the relationship that were able to manifest itself and become more toxic to the individuals in the relationship. So that's just my opinion. I feel like it takes two toxic, at least one. Well, it takes two. Let me just put it out there. It takes two people to keep a toxic relationship going, right? So I'm going to say it's at minimum has one toxic person. And the common let me say what I want to say. The common thread or the common thought is that everyone carries some measure of toxic traits or behaviors within themselves. Now, do they always manifest themselves? Maybe not. But it takes two to create that toxic relationship, because a person can have a relationship by themselves, right? So you can claim not to be toxic or have any toxic traits or toxic behaviors. And the other person is, if you want to point the finger at the other person, well, in order for that to become a toxic relationship, you have to remain in that relationship. So that's just Mr. P's perspective on it. You think what you want to think. So let's get into this. So let's start here. Let me share my screen with you guys so that we can kind of do a deep dive of what the topic it is for tonight, and what I'm hoping that we would gain an understanding or a better understanding together, right? So let's start. Masculinity. And this is interesting. Doing some of the research for this topic. Came across some interesting stuff, and I think that you might find it interesting as well. So, masculinity, as defined by Google, or I think they feed this stuff from Webster Dictionary, is it's a noun and it's the qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of men or boys. Qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of men or boys. Can we agree to that? Sounds pretty, I can agree to that. That's generally what masculinity is referring to, right? But here's the interesting part. Now, if you look at the use of masculinity over time, you will notice something interesting, or at least I think it's interesting. Now, use over time means how often the term was used in everyday language or appeared in written text or however it was. Do you notice something here? 1800s, 1850, 1900, the turn of the century. Not a whole, pretty flat, all the way up until the 1950s. Okay, starting to trend a little bit more. And then, bam, I wonder why masculinity and its use just skyrocketed in the last, I would say this was like 20 years. What were we saying? What terms were we used? Were we referring to the qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of men and boys? Interesting. So let me do the same perspective, give a different perspective as well. For let's look at femininity, opposite of masculinity, femininity, right? So let's look at that real quick. So feminine qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of women or girls. Pretty much same thing for men, just a woman's perspective from the woman's side, man, woman, right? Pretty parallel, right? And the use also trends on the same course. So something occurred after 1950. I say this is probably like 1960s to 2070s, 80s. Could it be a feminist movement? I don't know. Let's find out. Could be. So let's go back. Recap. Masculinity is qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of women or men or boys. Femininity, qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of women and girls, right? Nothing controversial about that. Pretty cut and dry. Just interesting that the use of the terms didn't get much use until I say after the second half of the 20th century, around here sometime. Okay. So something was happening that caused people to start having this conversation, or the use of it, people start writing about it, start talking about it more. But that's an interesting fact. So again, let's move on to next. Now, let's do toxic masculinity, which a lot of people use. I wouldn't say a lot of people, let me say a lot of women use in arguments talking about relationships, why men are not ready for relationships, why men are doing certain things wrong. I could be wrong, but I think this is usually a talking point where people are going back and forth about who's responsible for the state of relationships in today. I'm pretty sure toxic masculinity pops up quite often in those conversations. I could be wrong. Check me if I am, but I don't think I am. Right. So, toxic masculinity is an attitude or set of social guidelines stereotypically associated with manliness that often have a negative impact on men, women, and society in general. So, toxic masculinity is an attitude or set of social guidelines stereotypically associated with manliness that often have a negative impact on men, women, and society in general. Okay. That's how WebMD defines toxic masculinity. Okay. You can agree, disagree. Um, that's, I say we'll use that as our working definition for this conversation, right? For what we're discussing. Okay. Here's another interesting thing about toxic masculinity. Believe it or not, it was introduced by a man. Say that again. Toxic masculinity was a term introduced by a man. What, Mr. P? You what? Let me find it. Yes. Let me say it again. Toxic masculinity was a term garnered by a man. Yes. So let me give you the history behind it. Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit of this, but follow along with me. Toxic masculinity emerged within the mild poetic men's movement of the 1980s, coined by Shepherd Bliss. Let me say that again. Toxic masculinity emerged within the mythopoetic men's movement of the 1980s. Say that again. Mythopoetic men's movement of the 1980s, coined by Shepherd Bliss. So Bliss, according to this author confirmed to me in 2009 that he coined the term to characterize his father's militarized authoritarian masculinity. So Bliss in the 1980s, he brought up the term toxic masculinity to characterize his father's militarized authoritarian. Whoa, what's wrong with my tongue? I haven't even been drinking like that. Okay. He used the term to characterize his father's militarized authoritarian masculinity. Militarized authoritarian masculinity. So he was talking about his father. So in a 1990 interview, Bliss said that he used a medical term because he believed that, like every sickness, toxic masculinity has an antidote. So he was using the term to talk about his father's strict, militarized, authoritarian demeanor towards probably him and his family, the way he heard him. So his father sounds like it was a hard-nosed, maybe former military, very stringent man who, like many fathers during that time, authoritarian, meaning it was my way and that's it. There was only one ruler in the house, and it was dad. And dad was the beginning and the ending, the first and final say so, right? So his father, in raising him, operated as an authoritarian, and he attributed that to what he coined as toxic masculinity. So that's interesting. So here's the thing. From the 1990s and early 2000s, now go back to our timeline, but in the 1990s and early 2000s, toxic masculinity spread from men's movement to wider self-help academic and policy literature. So from the 1980s, for the first 10 years, toxic masculinity was used to improve or to help the men's identify or put into words a men's movement, but involving Shepherd Bliss, right? But in the 1990s and early 2000s, toxic masculinity spread from men's movements to wider self-help academic and policy literature. So the literature positioned that the emotionally distant father-son relationship produced toxically masculine men. Follow me here. Let me say it one more time. The literature basically said that emotionally distant father-son relationships produce toxically masculine men. So what did that mean? That means men who were raising their sons, because we're talking about men here, who were raising their sons um, in a very stringent and hard way with no, I would say, no emotional balance or emotionally distanced, where they were authoritarian or dictators pretty much to their sons, produce toxically masculine men. And it goes on, and we'll talk about later why this is. Because what happens is they argue that men who lack adequate fathering pursue unrealistic cultural images of masculinity and feel a constant need to prove their manhood. Right? So let me say that again. Men who lack adequate fathering pursue unrealistic cultural images of masculinity. So if you don't have the adequate relationship, or you have a father who is only a strict disciplinarian, and there's no balance with the emotional side, or if you're distant, i.e., the father is removed from your presence and in the way that you're raised, or not giving access, hint, hint, or, you know, mama and pop didn't make it work for whatever reason, and fathers don't have access to those children, it creates or has the potential to produce toxically masculine men, because they need to feel the constant need to prove their manhood, because they don't have anyone presently in the house who can direct that masculinity or the masculine traits and attributes in a way that they don't become oversaturated or to become toxic. So y'all follow me here. So follow me, follow me, stay with me. All right. So, it goes on to say that boys need a strong bond with the father figure / male mentor to avoid becoming toxically masculine men. Boys need the right kind of masculinity, and mothers can't give this to them. So, boys, before they become men, need exposure to the right kind of masculine men or masculine teachings and attributes, so that they don't become toxically masculine men. Because if they get a small bit of it, of this masculine attributes from small encounters with other men or other boys, or limited exposure to, say, a father figure or their father, that they don't get the complete idea of what masculinity means, and become oversaturated with the little information that they know. So follow me here. So they know that men are not supposed to be weak, or they follow that. So we'll get into that, but let me get into that some more. But they know one attribute for masculinity deals with strength, right? So that's one small aspect of it. But if you are only giving that portion of it, and you don't understand that there's a balance that comes with it, and there's moments when you don't need to do that, then you hold on to that attribute that you know, and you become too strong, or strong to the point where it becomes toxic, where you become emotionless or emotionally unavailable. Because we do, as men, are told that emotions are a weakness. And so it takes another male or male figure in our lives to demonstrate and to explain to us that no, that is not the whole picture. Yes, as a man, you have to display strength, and you have to be able to stand up on your own. But at the same time, there are time, places, and spaces that you can be vulnerable, and that you don't have to be that way. But if you're not giving that lesson, because you don't have access to those males or those men in your life or your father on a consistent basis to get the complete picture of what masculinity looks like. You can adapt or adopt that notion so strongly that it becomes toxic in your future relationships. So that's one example. So let's go down some more and let's dig a little deeper. Let me see. So I hope you're following me now. So again, toxic masculinity came from men's movements. I'm not gonna say no names, but a certain group of people. Oh, they said it for me. They said it for me. I didn't have to say it. I didn't have to say it. Feminists adopted toxic masculinity as a shorthand for characterizing homophobic and misogynistic speech and violence by men. So, toxic masculinity came from a group of men who were identifying traits in their personal experience with their fathers, so that they could label what the damage or that was done to them by fathers who displayed overly masculine tendencies and didn't provide the balance to them. And then that moniker of toxic masculinity was, as many monikers do, was adopted and taken over by feminists. And I don't have a problem with feminists. I don't have a problem with the feminist movement. But the feminists have adopted toxic masculinities, excuse me, as shorthand for characterizing homophobic and misogynist speech and violence by men. So since 2016, a notable number of media stories use toxic masculinity in discussions of U.S. President Trump and Me Too movement to describe the poor behavior of powerful white elite men in contrast to its earlier applications to marginalized men. So here, it was originally adopted to marginalized men, right? But it became more and more pop culture and popular media began to use it to for other things, right? So let's read some more here. So and it goes on to say, feminist scholars have adopted toxic masculinity as a useful frame for responding to resurgent masculinist right-wing politics. For instance, anti-feminism's long history has been reinvigorated within what media studies scholars label network misogyny, defined as an especially virulent strain of violence and hostility towards women in online environments. Sometimes linked with offline violence, toxic masculinity sums up the strain, right? So it's been lumped in with the resurgence of this feminist movement. And this is not my bias one way or the other. I'm just reading what it says. And it's been adopted away from its original intent and its original guise as a way to use for marginalized men. And it'll go on to say that more down here. So, but let me see. Yeah. Let me see. Let me see. Let me see. I gotta find it. And you can read as long as you go too. So just trying to make sure I saw it right there. So the maybe that's the next one. Okay, let me look at the next bit of information. Let's see. Nope, no, we got that on toxic masculinity. Oh, here it is. Okay. Let me see here. I think there's another part. Here it is up here. Okay, this is what I wanted to talk to you guys about. So we talked about the origin. But here's the thing that okay, here it is. This is what I wanted to talk to you about. The psychologist who also did this study noted that toxic masculinity as culturally normative but curable through engaging men with fatherhood. What does that mean? So they originally, when they brought up the term toxic masculinity, they used it as a medical term because he felt like it was curable. And the cure to toxic masculinity, according to the original guy who coined the phrase was that the cure was through engaging men with fatherhood, right? So it means that um, fathering is an antidote of toxic masculinity in both. Let me see what it. Make sure I read it. Okay, yeah, he says so. Let me just read word for word so you can see it. So these psychologists positioned toxic masculinity as culturally normative but curable through engaging men with fatherhood, position, pos, positioning an essentialist notion of masculine emotional development. Turn of the century policy discourse picked up on the prescription. For example, the founders of the U.S. National Fatherhood Initiative cited Pittman on fathering as an antidote to toxic masculinity in both his 1999 testimony to the U.S. House Judiciary Committee on Youth Culture and Violence and his edited book, Renewing the Sacred Vocation of Fathering. So Elberly suggests that emotionally absent fathers contribute to young men's violence and was likely a factor in the Columbine shootings. So he mentioned that early up in the article. I didn't read that, but young men badly need to see mature masculinity modeled out. Let me say that again. Young men badly need to see mature masculinity modeled out. Well-seasoned masculinity fundamentally transform the aggression of young males by capturing their masculine energy and directing it towards socially constructive pursuits. Let me read that again. Well-seasoned masculinity fundamentally transforms the aggression of young males by capturing their masculine energy and directing it towards socially constructive pursuits. And I'm just going to read this one. And he's specifically talking about violence in this particular lining of thought and questioning. But if young men turn to violence, they probably grew up with single mothers or at least had emotionally absent fathers. Let me say that again. If young men turn to violence, they probably grew up with single mothers or at least had emotionally absent fathers. Now, you can beg the question of whether it was more so the single mothers or the emotionally absent fathers. But if I were to look at the statistics, in most cases, two-parent households don't get the same outcomes in terms of the way that their boys are raised, like single mother households. So there's a study, I can't recall it right now, that says that there's basically no difference in their outcomes in terms of children for homes, single father households and two-parent households with a mother and father. There is a difference in the outcomes for single mother led households. I'm just a messenger. So the presence of the father is an important factor. We're not talking about causation, but correlation is an important factor in countering the toxic masculinity or boys who grow up to be toxic men. So I'm just going to say that in a nutshell. So basically, the prescription of engaged fatherhood as an antidote to toxic masculinity harmonized with the 21st century recommendations for a heteronormative family life in an era of neoliberal globalization. Toxic masculinity provided a discourse of diagnosing men's problems in the face of the gender gendered fallout from deindustrialization, during which well-paid jobs in masculine occupation sectors disappeared while feminized service sector occupants expanded. Influence organizations such as the OECD recommended increasing household incomes in such conditions by drawing mothers into paid work while promoting shared parenting. There were calls for welfare systems to include fathers when offering family services. An Irish Families Policy article argued for engaging men with fatherhood so that their wildness is tamed to the extent that they can adjust to the discipline of domestic routines, remain with their children and partners in their families. So basically what this verbiage is saying that um, to counter toxic masculinity, they suggest or they recommend heteronormative family life. Heteronormal family life. In other words, a nuclear family with the man and a woman, or a father and a mother. So they, in this article, suggest that this is an antidote or will counter the growth in toxic masculinity. Just providing the information. Okay, take for what it you want, but it's basically saying 2-parent households with a mother and father lead to less toxic men. Okay, so and some of the other stuff goes on to say talk about offering welfare services to men-led homes, such so that men can remain in the household with their children. So that's basically what that was saying. It was saying, yeah, because women are going into the workplace more, and they're just shared in the parenting. However, there needs to be, the welfare system needs to be set up such so that men as well as women can remain with their families, leading to a better outcome in terms of the men that these families are producing, right? So one last point, and then we'll wrap this up for tonight. But the label toxic masculinity tends to be applied to marginalized men. Terry Cooper's research on men in prison argued toxic masculinity involves the need to aggressively compete and dominate others, and it encompasses the most problematic proclivities in men. Toxic masculinity also includes a strong measure of the male proclivities that lead to resistance to psychotherapy. Similarly, the study of Black South African schoolboys links their violence with both toxic masculinity and poverty, describing them as valuing an oppositional street masculinity associated with the flashily dressed black male street thug, frequently a member of a gang and armed with a knife in possession. So basically what this is saying is that the term and the research on toxic masculinity, it leads to a strong measure of resistance to psychotherapy, meaning getting therapy, getting help. So it's almost like once men are poisoned, or boys, because they're not men when they're being poisoned. Once boys are poisoned, it leads to a strong resistance to psychotherapy, meaning it's hard to fix that toxic masculinity that the boys have adopted or created for themselves because of the absence of a male father figure or a nuclear normative hetero family for them to grow up and develop in. And so it's like they took, and let's go back to some of the definitions, and let me see. Let's talk this one about masculinity. They take some of these masculine traits. So, and of course, anything that you ingest too much of it can become toxic to your body. If you eat anything, too many sweets, too much alcohol, you smoke too much, even if you drink too much water, it becomes toxic to you. So let's look at some of these, the traditional masculine identity. So these are the traditional masculine traits. So um, these are the dominant masculinity beliefs in the US, and they have operationalized them down to, I think, about 4 for this purposes. So, they refer to it as traditional masculine ideology. Okay, traditional masculine ideology. Okay, so they're saying 3. So they have 3 scales of it, of the TMI scale. Okay. And let me just get credit to this Psychology Today, and I'm just going to read it and give them their credits. You can find this article on psychologytoday.com. TMI is operationally defined and measured in several closely related scales. We'll discuss 3 here. The foundational version of a TMI scale, developed by the psychologist David Brannon, is the Brannon Masculinity Scale, BMS. The Brannon Masculinity Scale, which specify 4 norms. These are the 4 norms associated with masculinity, at least in the US. That men should not be feminine. And I'm not going to say their quote stuff, so I don't want them to try to cancel me. But, men should not be feminine. Men should be, that's 1. That men strive to be respected for successful achievement. Okay, that's 2. And they do have 4 of them. That men should never show weakness. And that men should seek adventure and risk, even accepting violence if necessary. So let's just talk about the 4, right? That's 4 again. Men should not be feminine. Men should strive to be respected by successful achievement. That's as y'all young folks say, get in the bag. Men should never show weakness. Never let them see you sweat. Can't be vulnerable. And that men should seek adventure and risk, even accepting violence if necessary. So meaning we have a proclivity to violence if necessary, right? So you take any of these 4 traits, and if you, as we mentioned before, if you don't have the correct guidance of a male or father figure to show you how to balance these ideologies, you can be overly masculine, as we say, or you could become toxic masculinity. Men should not be feminine. And we feminine, as let me see if they have definitely. Let's see, femininity. No, we got that. I'll just we know what is considered feminine men, and the lines are being blurred more and more. We talked about this on Straight Talk with Dr. V and Mr. P with the Ebony photo shoot. Excuse me for forgetting his name, but the dress that men are wearing and the blurred lines that are now occurring from fashion, men should not be feminine. We can have a discussion about that, what everybody defines as feminine. But at one point in my upbringing, it was certain colors. It was certain mannerisms, certain ways of talking, speech. So again, had I not had the balance or the ability to strike a balance, knowing when is enough or when to give and let go, some people could become overly toxic in that way. And I agree. I can't say that I do not know people who are not homophobic. I'll talk about this in the future with this whole notion of pause. That didn't hit my generation. That's the generation after, So if you say anything that people consider suspect or could be misconstrued as homosexual or gay, and you're just dealing with another man, you have to say pause. Or you don't have to say it, but a lot of people say pause. A lot of men, I know a lot of guys say pause. Me personally, you take it what it is. I pause what? I'm a heterosexual man. There was no sexual in windows in what I was speaking to. I'm speaking to another man. I'm speaking you um, as a straight man to a straight man, as far as I know. So there's no sexual tension or sexual directions or where you could misconstrue it. So for me personally, I don't feel the need to say pause because if you know me, you know that I wasn't speaking with you in those terms. So that's something different. Um, Now, so that, in my opinion, could lead to that toxic masculinity path that people are talking to. But I digress. But okay, men are not supposed to be feminine. Um, Men should have strive to respect for successful achievement. Right. So successful achievement means financial wealth, and even that can be toxic um, if you think about it. Because if you put that above other things, above about being a well-being, a way to treat people, or your only goal is to get more and more and get strive and beat everybody else. Yeah, I get it. That could be toxic. So I'm not disagreeing with that. It is. Oh, that men should never show weakness. This is a big one, particularly in the black uh, community. Black men, we're not given the space to show weakness. We're taught from the very young age that um, don't show weakness, even to sometimes to our loved ones, to people that we can trust. So it's hard for a man to put his guard down, particularly with a woman. I can see how that can become toxic. So I'm not arguing that this cannot be toxic or what it is. I'm simply stating um, what some of these ideologies are. And again, men should seek adventure and risk, even accepting violence if necessary. Yeah, the thrill seeker. Some people push it too far. And there are some people who just strictly violence. They live and they strive on violence. So much so that it becomes toxic. But again, we're not arguing against for anything. My only notion is that at one, the oversaturation or use of toxic masculinity in environments or referring to situation relationships where it doesn't apply because people don't know what its intentions was, the origins of it, and how it should be applied. And again, as I stated, are single mothers an indicator of or a correlation of a potentially toxic man? I don't know. I'm not saying one against. I'm just saying based on what I've researched and what I read so far, you let me know. Single motherhood, particularly with men and boys, and we've had this argument before that man can't. I've had this argument in personal that I don't believe that a woman can show a boy how to be a man. You can raise them, yes, absolutely. Women raise boys all the time, but it takes that male presence and that male interaction. Will they learn how to balance all those masculine traits and ideologies that are adopted by most men around them? So if they get small interactions with it, or they don't get um, a fully emotionally balanced or engaged male figure, it can lead to toxic masculinity. So again, you know, um, if you're keeping your fathers and away from, or the fathers away from their children for whatever reason, are they a toxic man already, or are you creating a toxic man? I don't know. You tell me. Let me know what you think. So let me wrap this up. Um, in a nutshell, are single mothers contributing to toxic masculinity? I think that's what the title I'm going to get. We'll see what y'all saying, or do I want to call them baby mamas? What term should I use? Single mothers or baby mamas? Y'all let me know. Well, based on your responses to this, I'm pretty sure I'll know. But thank you for joining Nightcap with Mr. P, brought to you by Straight Talk with Dr. V and Mr. P. I can't wait till Dr. V listens to this and see if she has a response, or she might agree, she might disagree. One way or another, it is what it is. Hope you enjoyed the information that I shared with you. Look into it for yourself. Look at the causes of things. Look at the correlations, or because we really can't predict or call something causation, because we don't know. There's just too many factors. But we can look and see that there's some type of relationship with certain factors. If you see a lot of toxic men or toxic masculinity traits in certain men, and you go back to their upbringings, who was there and who wasn't there? That's a good question. So that gives you an indicator of what to look for. So who did your mama raise you? Did your daddy raise you? Your grandma? Who raised you, boy? Peep it. Look out for yourself. Be prepared so that you can know what you're getting into fully. And hopefully, if you're one of those brothers out there, if someone has used the term toxic masculinity to describe you, really examine yourself. Be true to yourself, to thy own self. Be true. You can lie to everyone else, but if you know that you were, and a lot of men will admit that they missed out having their father there. That is one thing that a lot of men admit, but they may not know what the implications are, or they may not be able to put it into words. But a lot of men who were not raised with their fathers, they feel that emptiness, that pain, and that void. And if you know that's you, and you're having struggles with relationships, you really have to examine who you are, and do the work. Do the work. To thine own self be true. So let me leave you with this prayer before we wrap it up. Thank you for joining Nightcap with Mr. P. Good night. God bless. I pray God blesses you in the days to come, and that any troubles on your heart are laid to rest. And when you wake up in the morning, you have more clarity than you had the day before. So with that being said, signing off to Nightcap with Mr. P. I hope you tune in, like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Check out the background. ATL shouted. If you didn't know, now you know. Vibe with me. Till next time. Breakdown. Get in it.